For this, we are using the spreadsheet sales data. As you can see, there's a lot of data in a table. We're going to select anywhere within that table and then choose Pivot Table Insert. And it's going to do it from the table or range. In this case, the range is called sales data. That's a named range. We're going to put the new pivot table onto a new worksheet. That's the default. And as you see, you get a framework where you now select the things that you wish to portray in your pivot table. And we chose, in this case, region and total sales. We then go back to our data sheet, take a look, and this time we'll insert using the recommended pivot table setting. And on the second variant down on the left, you'll see that they do indeed recommend that the region is the main element of your pivot table. The highest level question that you're asking, basically. But then within that, we can take products and drag it under region into the rows area, and that will give us further breakdown of products by region. You can also take quarter and put it into the filters, and that way, if you were wanting to just see a specific quarter, you can choose select multiple items, uncheck all, and then just choose quarter 4. To undo that, you just go back in and select all again. And all of the boxes will be checked. Click OK. And in fact, it shows the total once again on sheet 1. Now we take that same quarter and drag it over to the columns area. Then you see how the columns become the quarters. And the grand total is moved to the right of quarter 4. Let's go back to sheet 2. Here we have the regions and products currently being depicted. We'll do the same thing, taking products into the columns area. This just gives you a different way to pivot all of your information. Once you've created your tables, then you're likely going to want to use some additional tools. For example, the value field settings. This will allow you to set the number format for the total sales, and in fact the sum of total sales. We're going to set the decimal points down to 0. Click OK. Click OK again, and you'll notice that in our pivot table, all of the numbers are now in currency format with no decimals. This makes it a little bit easier to read. For this next exercise, we're going to put our cursor in the grand total column and do a sort so that it goes from smallest to largest. And you can see the grand total has been sorted in ascending order now. We're just saving the document very briefly. And now let's go back to sheet 1. Remember that a pivot table has value, but the visualization that is most effective is when you actually add a chart. So here we're using the Pivot Table Analyze tab and going over to the Pivot Chart option in the command buttons. We're going to choose the 4th item, which is called the 3D clustered column. Click OK, and it will generate your chart based on the table. We had to have selected the pivot table in order for that to have worked. And you can see that down in the lower left there is a filter button for regions. Here we'll use that same technique we learned earlier and select only the Southwest region. And this shows you pretty quickly how you can have an interactive visualization of your data based on the pivot tables that you created already. Let's go to sheet 2 and take a look at the same thing. This time we're going back to Pivot Table Analyze tab, selecting from the Tools group, Pivot Chart. We'll use the same type of chart. Any chart could be created here. You see all the options on the left. In this case, because we have the products as our columns, this can get quite busy as a chart. So you want to stretch it wide, and then you can see that it shows the clusters of columns in a better way. Now we'll select a region, Southwest again, our favorite. And now you see all the products in the Southwest. But the great thing about pivot tables is that, and pivot charts, is there's always more information you can glean from them. So you can do filtering on demand. You can also double click on one of the columns. So in a moment, we'll do that. Let's just verify that we're looking at all of the regions right now. Let's go through the exercise of dragging this, sizing it appropriately. It just makes it more visually pleasing when you can do that. Okay, now watch what happens when we double click on one of the columns. You get a choice to zoom in on a specific component of that column, what makes that column. And you see, we did by state, and then it got very busy again. So let's go back and select just one region. Remember, we're now showing the states within the Southwest region. Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. So yet again, you can see the depth and value of analyzing data with your pivot charts, and when you can drill down like that. Speaking of drilling in, you might like to use the timeline feature. You have to have your chart selected, and then you have to choose what you would like to drill into. In this case, we chose order date. It automatically grouped it by months, as you see in the upper right corner. We'll zoom in there. That little drop down next to months allows you to select quarters. This is helpful in analyzing performance in a company. So in this case, we could, for example, click on Q4 2018, and it will then change both the chart and the pivot table. Sometimes when you click on something, there's nothing in there. That's just because the answer is empty. You can also add in more regions. They don't need to be contiguous. You can do multiple regions. And the advantage of all of this is that it can actually give you a visual of what you're seeing in the chart. It's easier to visualize it with a timeline, and then the next thing, which is called slicers. But you can see how interactive and interesting this is, where you're actually really able to slide and show very, very valuable pertinent data. And one note of interest, the pivot table will also adjust as you make these adjustments to your slider, your timeline slider. Now let's go in and add slicers. A slicer is a way to control in a visual a specific category from your pivot chart field. So in this particular case, we're going to use state. And let's use salesperson because we'd like to see the performance of salespeople and how they relate to the information that we're depicting in our chart. You see, by default, all of the states and all of the salespersons are actually shown. So what we need to do now is just click on any one of them. For example, we could click one of the states, and that will then filter down our chart to just show less information, but potentially more valuable information. We chose Arizona in that case. By holding Control, you can select something that is not adjacent. You can do the same thing in this, and By holding control, once again, select a non-adjacent group of salespeople. And that is how you use the combination of pivot tables, pivot charts, timelines, and slicers with Microsoft Excel to depict your data.